The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Hey everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms, and I'm sitting across the desk from one Nephi Cole.
What's up, Dave? I'm still
Not
here.
Not much. Yeah, good. But Mike's not. So Mike McGrady is once again absent.
Sorry, Mike.
I'm just going to start, I teach a class at the University of Wyoming, right? And I grade my students. Part of their grade is just showing up, just being there. You know, they get...
Do your students get something at the end of the class?
Knowledge.
Yeah.
Lots of knowledge.
Yeah. Do you think that that's maybe part of the issue? You know, if we're going to dangle like a stick in front of Mike and tell him, you know, it's like he needs to be here more often, he might say, what's the benefit to me? You
mean like a grade?
Yeah. Because
a diploma?
He doesn't really get a grade, and there's not... So if you give him a... You know, you're going to kind of have to give him a P.
I don't know what kind of incentivizing we can do to get him back here.
Cold beverages?
Maybe. That might work. Yeah, that might work. Mike, if you're listening, we hope that you'll join us again.
Oh.
Very soon.
He's never going to hear this.
No, I know. He might.
Have you ever listened to one of our episodes?
I have, except I really hate listening to my own voice. And so
do I.
I don't listen very often. And between all the other podcasts I listen to, everything else that I do, I don't have time. Plus, if I listen 2 hours, all I would hear are the mistakes.
Yeah. Well, in lieu of continuing to dig this hole deeper and deeper, I will say I listened to the last episode. I thought it was very good.
Good.
Yeah.
And I think we've had actually I know we've had some really solid feedback on the one we did on fires as well.
Yeah.
Western fires, so that recent episode. So if
More
you haven't
to come
checked
on
that out, yeah, for sure.
More to come.
Yep.
So I know you've been doing some research on that and have some a lot of information you're putting together into an article about the history of fire, you know, in the Americas, and kind of refresh and changes in climate and what all that looks like. And we've talked about it. It seems very fascinating.
Yeah, I am. I actually spent all morning today kind of working on that article, and I'm hoping to have it done in the next couple of days, next 2 to 3 days. And I don't know if I'm going to have it, put it out there to try and get published by somebody, because that kind of takes a while. So I might just put it out as a blog. Maybe we'll put it on our website, on our social media pages. But it's just another resource to kind of dispel some of the myths that are out there about why we're having these fires. You know, talk about why we really are having the fires, and really dive into some of the history about not just forest management, but the forest ecology as well. So I think that'll be pretty interesting. So yeah, we'll get more information out on that soon.
In other news, last podcast we talked quite a bit about the Clean Water Act. If you're interested in that, go back and check it out. If you have more questions on the Clean Water Act or other wetlands issues, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, feel free to drop us a line. I do have to say, deciding I like duck hunting was maybe a huge mistake, because now I'm obsessed by duck hunting stuff. I didn't realize just how much gear there's involved in duck hunting, but now I think I want to buy a boat.
Yeah, you were mentioning that among all the other things that you are...
gear.
All the other gear you're looking at buying.
Yeah, I'm going to steal a kayak from you, though, for the rest of this year, because you can't use it because you've got a giant cast on.
I had a giant cast on. I got my boot off yesterday.
Yeah, now you've got a Nike
day before yesterday. Now I'm wearing a Nike. Yeah, I am super pumped because I've got an elk hunt coming up that I didn't know if I was going to be able to go on, because I had broken my foot a little over a month ago. And I was in this boot for a month, and I went in to have it checked out a couple days ago.
What size shoe do you wear?
Well, like an 11. I wear a 12 boot.
Do you have some boots with like a serious stiff rand.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, good.
It's a pretty heavy boot, but it's gonna be what I'm gonna be stuck with this year.
See if some of our listeners would consider loaning you their boots, because you're not going to buy new sets. So see if somebody would just mail you a box of boots.
No, you and I have discussed this. That's actually one place where I'll actually invest some money. I think footwear is about the most important thing you can have when you're doing the type of hunting that I do, where you're putting on tons of miles every day. And so I actually make sure that my feet are comfortable. I have really high quality socks high quality merino wool socks that breathe and have, they wick away sweat.
Yep.
They're breathable. They're thick and durable. And, with the two combined, I don't get hot spots. I don't get blisters. I can be comfortable all day. We'll see if that's the case this time as I'm going out there now, because so the doctor said I can ease back into my normal activities over the course of a couple of weeks. And then within about a month, I'm supposed to be able to be full release for all high impact activities. But I'm a week out from my elk hunt.
Yeah, and you're 3 weeks out from your goat hunt.
I'm 3 weeks out from my goat hunt. So I'm using that goat hunt as the ease back into it, and I'm using elk hunting as like the midway point to full intensity that should hopefully be there by the time this mountain goat hunt starts.
Best of luck.
So it's funny when people think of, elk hunting in the Rocky Mountains, they kind of think of it as, a lot of work, high intensity, you're putting a lot of miles on the boots, and I'm trying to treat that as my, ease my way back in for the big stuff. Anyway, I'm pumped. Like, I'm walking pain-free. I'm super excited.
Cool.
Super excited.
So I got some stuff in the mailbox today that was pretty interesting. Neat article that came across the weekly. It's an industry publication, so not everybody gets it. But talking about lightweight hunting rifles and how they're really there's a real uptick in demand for those rifles. Specifically, it was talking about the new Weatherby. Disclaimer, not sponsored by Weatherby, but their backcountry tie rifle. And I thought that was interesting because they noted in there that backcountry, it says backcountry is becoming the byword among hardcore hunters. And so it's really interesting how that's really taken off. I'm going to segue this into something else. You'll see.
Okay.
So, and as you know, I recently renewed my Backcountry Hunters and Anglers membership. And the CEO of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is none other than Lantani, who we've had on the program before.
Right.
If you're interested, go listen to that episode. Very passionate conservationist guy who really cares about stuff. Guess what Lan's favorite kind of hunting is?
Front country?
No.
Front country hunting? Truck? Road hunting?
It's waterfowl.
That's what you're going with. I thought it was something ironic.
Yeah.
because he heads up backcountry hunters and anglers,
yeah,
so he loves road hunting.
Driving around in pickup is what I've heard.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going for there. No,
that is not true. That is all false. But yeah, and so, kind of going back down that and continuing on that pace, today we want to talk about the ACE Act.
That's right. So America's Conservation Enhancement Act.
That's right.
So we mentioned it last week on our last episode. We touched on it briefly because we were talking about waterfowl hunting and WOTUS and different waterfowl policy. And the the America's Conservation Enhancement Act actually has a big component of that.
Huge component.
Is addressing waterfowl. So we thought we'd take some time today because I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're probably, kind of a nerd like we are on these policy issues. So you've probably heard about America's Conservation Enhancement Act, or the ACE Act, and you probably heard that it recently passed, and you probably even saw press releases saying what a good thing this is for sportsmen. But maybe you didn't see exactly what all is included in this act. That it's this great thing for conservation, that sportsmen are lauding it, but what's in it? And so we want to take a little bit of time and talk about some of what's in it. We'll go into more detail in some of the pieces than in others, and we might not talk about every little thing that's in it. But we will talk because there's a lot to it. And it is a big deal, and it's it's remarkable. ACE Act aside, or ACE Act included in this, 2020 has been a pretty remarkable year in Congress.
It has.
For hunters and anglers.
It has. This is interesting because I actually was going to bring this up last episode, but I didn't. So, we've passed in the last few years for hunters and for our interests. You know what has passed?
Yeah, and I'm sure you want to say it.
The Land and Water Conservation Fund, permanent reauthorization of funding.
Right. Well, permanent reauthorization first.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And then funding for it. Huge, like
generational win.
Generational win, we'd say. Guess what else? Pittman-Robertson Modernization Act. For those people who don't know, what that allows, there's a lot of flexibility that now gives the states to be able to recruit hunters and anglers. It's a huge deal for states in being able to provide opportunities and locations for people to go hunt and shoot, but also because it allows for not just state but regional approaches to using PR dollars to do recruitment, retention, reactivation of hunters. And that is a big deal because, as we know, interest in hunting has been going down. And so now you have an opportunity to do marketing to try and get people involved. So there's ACE Act, LWCF, Pittman-Robertson Modernization, the Target Marksmanship Training Support Act, which gives states additional monies from their PR dollars to be able to develop shooting ranges and locations for people to go participate. And the other one that we've recently talked about, the Great American Outdoors Act.
Which included the LWCF, that was part of it.
The funding.
Right.
Yep.
But then the other piece was the deferred maintenance funding for national parks and other federal lands.
Yeah. That's 5 pieces of really big legislation for hunters.
There's more, though, too.
Go ahead.
Because I'm just now thinking of it, I'm going to get the name of it wrong, but it was this big public lands package that passed last year. Mm-hmm. And it included things like access for areas of public land that you couldn't get to before, designations of new wilderness areas, designations of new wild and scenic rivers, just an assortment. And
it was the sportsman's package.
I think I can't remember. I thought it was called the public. I thought it was viewed as the public lands package, but it has benefits for sportsmen because it had all of these different public land.
Yeah, and that was roughly 2 years ago that passed, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
It was in this prior Congress, or in this same Congress, I believe. Maybe it was at the tail end of the last one. I'm not remembering this specific date.
I think it was tail of the last one, but it's pretty amazing.
Either way, when you think about the number of things that have passed when nothing seems to be able to pass Congress, like
our issues
seems to get through Congress, and our issues are getting through, and our issues have become election issues.
Well, not just that, because they are the issues. I've been saying this for a long time. They are the issues that bridge party lines. Because these are the issues that whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, people don't believe this yet maybe. So if you're listening, hammer this home into your soul. Like these issues that we care about, conservation issues, but also more traditional like Second Amendment type issues, that community that these things speaks to, that may be Republican, maybe Democrat, maybe independent, they've realized that they don't have to settle. They don't have to choose one side or the other. And they can effectively lobby both left and right. And they're sought after because they represent, when you hear what turns elections, it's not the strident left and the strident right that make the difference in elections. It's the middle. It's being able to speak to those people, the 5% who are teetering on one side or the other. And what people have realized is we occupy that. That really, speaks to who we are. And so I think it's really exciting that sportsmen are in this place where they can make a difference like that and, believe it or not, bring people together on things that are important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you can tell how these issues bridge party lines and they're just nonpartisan when you look at the vote tallies on some of these things. It's not like they're passing by.
They're not squeaking through.
No, they're not getting a simple majority, or they're not getting that one vote. I mean, they're blowing through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually pretty amazing to see.
So before we get back on track, obviously that is why, as communities, as a community, that's why we have to not let the hunting, that's why we have to not let the hunting fish community, the sport shooting community become subject to one side or the other, to one argument or the other. That's why it must maintain its pragmatic nature, because if we were just seen as like we're nothing but a voice for a party, well, guess what? We lose that leverage. Then whoever's in office, maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't, depending on how big the other interest groups are and whether they care more about your issue. But if you're willing to kind of have a robust discussion right in the center, man, it's a good thing.
That's why it's also important to continually, and we see this all the time, but what's important to continually educate, to provide education on the importance of hunting and shooting sports, right? To members of both parties and to just the general public, right? Because we are such a small segment of the population, really, I mean, a tiny segment of the population when we're less than 5 million people of a 330 million person country. We're a tiny piece of that. Maybe we have outsized influence because having a voice because we've been able to coalesce around these ideas and have a strong voice that can appeal to both sides of the aisle.
More than that, it's just because we're cool.
Well, there's that, obviously.
Yeah, people want to be like us.
That was unsaid. Didn't need saying. The more you say that, the less cool it becomes.
I won't say it again.
Coolness is inherent by not saying you're cool. Right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, it's really exciting. So be excited about that, everybody. It's cool.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about the most recent
win
for the hunting community.
Tired of winning?
Never.
No, never.
Doesn't happen. Can't be done.
Nope.
So the ACE Act. And so the ACE Act, I believe, correct me if it's passed both House and the Senate.
I think it's waiting for the signature.
I think it's still waiting, and probably because of, unforeseen circumstances.
I don't know, things happen.
People get COVID, that kind of stuff.
I wasn't going to say that, but
anyway, it's not going to get held up. It's going to get signed. If it hasn't been signed by the time this airs, I'll be surprised. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about what's in it.
Okay.
All right. Do you want to kick it off, or do you want me to kick it off?
I want you to.
Okay.
Because you have better notes than I do.
All right. So let me start first with what it does. Let's build off of last week. So last week we were talking about wetlands and waterfowl.
Awesome.
So let's talk about what it does for wetlands and waterfowl. For 30 years, more than 30 years, there's been this program under the North American Wetlands Conservation Act.
Yep.
It's been the only federal grant program that's entirely focused on conserving wetlands for waterfowl and and other migratory birds.
Yep. And it's a really neat program. It's a tripartite agreement, which I just wanted to be able to say tripartite. So three different countries: Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
For the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, or are you talking the Migratory Bird Treaty Act?
No, I'm talking about the North American Wetlands Conservation Act.
Okay.
It provides funding and administrative direction for the implementation of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan and the Tripartite Agreement on Wetlands between Canada, U.S., and Mexico.
Yeah, okay.
And an interesting note about it that I don't know if you knew. So the grant program is associated with it. Mm-hmm. All that money is not just spent in the U.S.
Yeah, I did know that.
Yeah. So it's a very unique grant program because...
Yeah. But it can have benefits.
Yes.
It has to have benefits to our waterfowl in the US.
But at least 50% of that has to be spent outside of our borders.
Huh. Well,
isn't that fascinating?
That is fascinating.
That's pretty interesting. Okay.
I didn't know 50%. I didn't realize that number.
At least 50%, not more than 70%.
So here's what it's done. Since its inception, there have been more than 5,600 conservation partners that include landowners and corporations and others that have implemented projects in all 50 states and have restored more than almost 33.5 million acres of wetlands. So it's a vitally important program. It's important for water quality. It's good for the economy. It's created over 7,000 jobs annually just through this program. And then obviously as a hunter or an angler, when you're putting this kind of investment on the ground into waterfowl projects, and you've restored more than 33 million acres of wetlands, that's great for a hunter from a hunting standpoint for waterfowl populations and distribution. So that was one of the big things in there, is it renewed that program and funded that program.
Yep. And I think just kind of a side note that I'm going to guess you're aware of this, but if you're not, you know what the source of the funding is?
Tell me.
Pittman-Robertson. So the Act converts the Pittman-Robertson account into a trust fund with the interest available without appropriation through 2006. It carries the programs authorized by the Act, along with there's an additional authorization for an annual appropriation. And that includes $15 million plus an amount equal to the fines and forfeitures that are collected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. But I think that was kind of cool. Like, again, I'm kind of a homer on the Pittman-Robertson, but I think it's neat that there's that touch point in the Act.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about. Let's stay on the water stuff, and then we'll get to the terrestrial stuff.
Okay.
So another thing that it does is it continues the Chesapeake Bay restoration program,
which is super cool,
right? So for those of you that are from the West, like we are, you hear about Chesapeake Bay. Maybe you visited Chesapeake Bay, but for those that live in and around Chesapeake Bay, they know, those people know the true importance that bay is to the local economy there.
For people that don't know, if you're talking about the people who live around the Chesapeake Bay, let's just say all of you live around the Chesapeake. Like, there's a ton of things around the Chesapeake Bay. We're talking about a huge estuary system that covers a massive.
It's the largest estuary system in the United States.
Yeah, it's huge.
It is.
And it runs and it's surrounded by huge urban population centers. And that's one of the other things that makes it unique. You can look at some other areas that we consider to be more or less untouched. Chesapeake Bay is surrounded by urbanization. So there are unique challenges to that bay that it's faced for hundreds of years, because as America has grown, as all those cities have grown, you've had these pressures on that unique, vital, important estuary that, where our environmental awareness hadn't caught up to the growth of the country yet. So there's some big challenges there.
Right. And it has a history of some significant pollution issues.
Yes. And that's what I was alluding to.
Yeah. Right. And let's just say it, right? There have been really significant pollution issues over the decades. And
anytime you have that level of humanity living next to a water body, guess what flows downhill?
Right.
And everything does.
And a water body that is a critically important commercial fishery as well. It's always been a very important and a very vital fishery on the East Coast. And this is sort of an odd comparison, right? But you think about the challenges that Chesapeake Bay has faced and its importance as a fishery. And then you think of something like the Pebble Mine. And, we had that episode, we did the episode on the Pebble Mine up there in Alaska, the possibility of this and the importance of that fishery. And so up there in Alaska, you're looking at this fishery that's a very important commercial and recreational fishery, but it doesn't have the type of development around it that Chesapeake Bay has. So it doesn't have the pollution issues. And one of the big concerns is with that Pebble Mine is that you would be effectively creating these devastating pollutants, potential pollutants into the waterway and causing significant problems. And you've seen what that can mean and the amount of money it can take to try and restore these ecosystems. When that happens, you can use Chesapeake Bay as a great example. We were investing millions and billions of dollars into the restoration of that bay to preserve that fishery and that economy, for clean water, for bird habitat as well. It's a really important waterfowl habitat as well, and so it's a critically important program because so many people depend on it, but so much wildlife also depends on it. And this bill continues to support that program, right, for Chesapeake Bay protection and restoration. So that's a big deal. But there's some things in this bill also that impact the West, right? So it's not just, well, obviously the wetlands the wetland protection impacts all 50 states. Chesapeake Bay is really more limited in the impact, although that commercial fishery sends fish all over the place for food. But there's some interesting things in this bill from a terrestrial standpoint. So here's a couple of things that I'd maybe touch on. The first one is, okay, so we've talked about this subject several different times over the course of the years that we've been doing this podcast, and it would be animal damage. In particular, animal damage, damages caused to livestock by grizzly bears and wolves, for example. And I think we've talked about, but for a quick refresher, and I'll use, since we're in Wyoming, I'm going to use Wyoming as an example, but other states have similar models to this. But if a landowner loses livestock to wolf or grizzly bear predation, right, and that's confirmed by the Game and Fish Department, they go out there and say, "Yep, this animal was killed. This cow was killed by a grizzly bear." There is a provision in state law that says the state will compensate that landowner for that loss, try and make that landowner whole. It's a way of creating, acceptance, or acceptance is the wrong word. I'm struggling to come up with it. Maybe you can come up with it. Tolerance, support for having large carnivores on the landscape, and building support for the Endangered Species Act as well. Right, is one of the things is, if you lose something,
what's
you
the
lose
cost?
Property, we're gonna reimburse you for that property. And
that's right.
In this state, like in some other states, the money for that comes directly from hunters. So hunting license sales pay for the loss of livestock, right? So it gets to be very expensive. It can be very expensive, several $1 million a year in this state, for example, to compensate landowners for losses from wolves and grizzly bears. So here's what the ACE Act does. The ACE Act says, all right, we're basically going to supplement. We're going to provide a grant program to supplement the states that are having to deal with these damage issues from, and this is an important distinction. It's the title of the section is called Losses of Livestock Due to Depredation by Federally Protected Species. But federally protected species isn't maybe what most people would think of it as it's defined in this act. It's a little different. So it's anything that currently is protected by the Endangered Species Act, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, or that ever has been protected by those. And I can't, there might be another act included in there too. So gray wolves, for example, were listed in Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, the Panhandle of Utah. They no longer are. But for purposes of the ACE Act, those wolves are still considered federally protected species for being able to receive this supplemental funding, this grant funding. So basically, when a state agency is paying, like, there's now a pot of money available for states to ask for supplemental support to help pay for these damage claims through the ACE Act. And not just to pay for landowners for the damage claims, but also to do proactive work, to do on-the-ground proactive work to try and prevent conflict in the first place. So it can be used for both of those things. It can't supplant state funding. The state has to have a program in place in order to qualify for this funding. But if the state has a program in place and they're doing some pay, they're paying for these damages and for some of these mitigation measures, the ACE Act allows them, there's grant money available through the ACE Act to help the states, which in turn helps. When you think about when I told you that money is coming from sportsmen's dollars, well, what does that mean? If they don't have to spend quite as much from sportsmen's dollars on dealing with damage issues, they can invest that money in other places. So it has the chance to benefit other wildlife as well by freeing up some resources for the states. So that's a pretty neat piece of this bill as well. There's another neat piece.
Ready.
Okay. So we haven't done an episode on this. We've had a number of people that have asked us to do one on this. I feel like we need to find the right expert to bring on to have this conversation, or series of experts. But chronic wasting disease.
Yep. I tried to get one to be on the show today.
Did you?
Declined.
You didn't tell me that.
No, I didn't. But let's just say we had a very long conversation about it, and this highly skilled individual was not ready to broach that topic yet because it's such a sticky topic.
Fair enough. So we're not going to get into the weeds of it because we'll say something incorrect. But
yes, but we're going to talk about it at some point.
We will,
because it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's a huge deal, and it's a growing deal. And the basics of it are there's a prion that infects.
Yeah, it's a prion-based disease.
Yeah, prion-based disease, and it's exactly as it describes. They get this, and they waste away to nothing until they effectively starve to death because they go blind. They do, all kinds of stuff. It just
affects their nerve system.
Yeah, their neurological system, and so they just can't function anymore, and then they effectively just shrivel away and starve to death and die. It's a grotesque disease.
It's just bad news.
It's awful, and it's spreading. It's in like 24 states now.
Yeah,
and it's still spreading, and it's it is a significant issue. In the ACE Act, there's recognition that it's a significant issue, and so there are a couple of things in the ACE Act. One is the establishment of this federal advisory committee or task force to really dive in on the federal level, to dive into best management practices and approaches to dealing with and coordinating with states around managing chronic wasting disease and trying to limit its spread and trying to address and reduce its effectiveness or its impact. So it creates that. There's also a piece of this, and see if I can get. It's like it's like a contest, right? So there's a piece of this that's trying to incentivize through financial means a contest to develop new technologies and new approaches to address not just disease issues, but invasive species issues and other things. So there's a financial incentive built into this bill for innovation.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a pretty neat piece. So that's in there as well. And the other piece around chronic wasting disease is this commissions a study by the National Academy of Sciences to determine the pathways and mechanisms of chronic wasting disease transmission in the U.S. So you're getting some of the best you're going to create the funding to deploy some of the best scientific minds around this in the country to put together a study on pathways and mechanisms for transmission. Because there's a fear right now out there. There's a fear out there that CWD could transmit at some point to humans. And so that's all.
Yeah,
that's all.
It's important to note, as you say that's never been shown to be the case or possible or plausible. So we're not starting anybody on a.
Oh yeah. No,
add to some kind of a fear that's unjustified.
I think the furthest the thing that raised people's fear a little bit was, what was it? It was a study where they fed a certain type of species of monkey, infected brain tissue, like copious amounts of brain tissue. I was
never involved in this study, Dave, and nor have I read it.
You haven't?
So I am not.
And so it actually transmitted to a primate. I will not
comment on it.
Yeah, it transmitted to a primate, but it took some like it took a lot of work to get it to transmit to a primate, but because they were able to do that, and humans are.
So here's my take on this. Without going any further there.
There's a fear.
One of the biggest things, this is a huge challenge, and this is why I think we as the hunting community have to stay on top of this. What's the most popular animal? What's the most popular big game animal in America?
Oh yeah, white-tailed deer.
White-tailed deer. What's the percentage of Americans that hunt? Is it going up or going down?
That's going down.
Yeah. So let's just pretend that we had a scare. I don't know that we've ever seen a health scare in the United States of America, that it's got a bunch of people like, not saying overreacting, but a bunch of people acting in a certain way. Like, you play this thing out to worst case scenario, it could be extremely damaging to the future, to hunting in America in general.
For sure.
Because as much, imagine what people are saying right now about COVID and where it's came from. And the assumption that right now, like, without more scientific review, that it's related to wet markets and to wildlife trade in Asia. And you have seen groups right now are pushing, and I don't know if you've been following this, but there are groups who are anti-hunting groups who are right now actively pushing, saying, like, this is proof, COVID-19 is proof that we shouldn't have anybody ever eating wildlife, period, the end. And so think about that. If you care about hunting, when you think about these things, like, so then what? What's the end game of this? If people, that's why it's, to me, very concerning and scary, and something that as a hunting community, we need to make sure we have all our ducks in a row and we can answer all the questions. If not, somebody's going to make up an answer for you. Well, somebody's going to invent what they think the problem is, and they're going to invent what they think the answer is, and they're not necessarily going to do it for reasons other than they may really hate hunting.
And that's why this investment in the ACE Act, in the battle against chronic wasting disease, is so important. That's why the creation of this task force is so important. That's why commissioning this study by the National Academy of Sciences, that's why that's so important, because we need to get a handle on this. We need to have the best scientific information we can possibly have around this. We need to be able to make people we need people to be comfortable with the idea that it might be out there, but that there's no impact to human health, right? And hopefully that's what this kind of work can show, or it can develop ways for us to address chronic wasting disease, invest in treatments, and come up with management techniques that can reduce the prevalence of it, and make the ease for testing your big game as easy as possible. All those things to make it comfortable. At
the risk of getting extra wonky, I will back up to the Clean Water Act and tell everybody something that you may not have known, which is that in many cases the Clean Water Act doesn't make the assumption that you're necessarily going to get every water body perfect all the time, that it's always going to be, it's never going to test negative for phosphorus or nitrogen or E. coli or something else. It actually doesn't require it. What it requires is that you're implementing the best management practices in good faith, that you're trying to do something about it. And so this is an interesting thing, which is when you get groups together and you work on some of these problems, the best defense that you have if you're an affected community is to say, I understand this problem and I'm working on it proactively. Because when people show up and they try and tell you how to correct a problem, if you've already got a plan to correct it, if you're working on it, it nullifies or it blunts those arguments that people would bring in that might negatively affect you. This applies to land use planning, it applies to waters, it applies to so many things, and it applies to hunters. Because if people come and say, like, oh yeah, we're going to give you a new way to manage game species in the United States of America, if we can fall back on something like the North American model of conservation, and we can say, look, we have the scientific expertise, we know what we're doing it better than anybody else can, that is absolutely the best defense that we have, both in the public forum and under the law, for being able to keep doing things the way that we are doing them. And so it's extremely important that we invest in the best scientific knowledge when we find these problems, that we're willing to look at things in a critical light and willing to try and innovate to make things better. If we don't do it, if we ignore it, somebody else is going to step in and force us to do something. This applies all across the board in management with wildlife. And it applies in many ways. Like, there's some that come to mind immediately that I don't even want to bring up. But remember, if we're doing voluntary incentive-based programs and we are on top of it and we understand the science better than the people who aren't friends of our community, we're going to win the argument. So invest in it.
Yeah, and remember, in a lot of these things, in a lot of different acts, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, other places that talk about science, they use the term best scientific information available. That doesn't mean the best scientific information. That means the best that we have right now. And sometimes we know the best we have right now isn't the best. Like, if we had the resources, we could do better. And we know that we could do better. We know what's missing from some of the studies, and how if we just had the resources, we could go capture more and complete the picture, right? And have the best scientific. So there's best available, and then there's best possible. And I think we should always be trying to achieve the best scientific information possible. And that's what this kind of investment does, is it puts you in that direction of being able to develop the best scientific information possible. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I want to tie. Everybody's going to get mad because this is just so important, in our community and in the world today. We don't look at information anymore. We don't look at data. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard somebody make some kind of a concrete, pivotal comment that they want everybody to change the world based on. And then when you start looking at the data behind that reasoning, they just haven't done their homework.
It's all talking points and hyperbole. It's like sound bites. Everybody wants the sound bite. They see something, and without it fits the narrative of what they want to believe. Right? They see a headline, and it fits the narrative of what they want to believe, so they believe it.
Yeah. Or a goal that they may have that may be unrelated to the data they've been given. So if it can be made to, like, if I can take that little tiny piece of truth and I can spin it to help, add to fortify a pre-existing argument that I have, well, then by all means do it.
Yeah, or it's taking one piece of truth but ignoring 10 other pieces of truth.
Yes.
It's the reason why I'm writing that article we talked about on Western fires, is because I keep seeing so much where people get one data point correct and then make these unreasonable extrapolations and ignore all of the other science that's out there, and so I'm thinking, well, I'm just going to run down that rabbit hole and I'm going to read every study I can get my hands on, and I'm going to write something.
Oh man.
And
you're going to be obsessed now with this issue.
I'm super obsessed right now.
There's a couple of issues that I am obsessed with, and it's because of this. It's because I've done the same thing. I'll tell Well,
I know.
You know what they are.
Yeah, of course I know what they are.
Yeah,
and one of them is actually addressed in
go ahead.
In the ACE Act.
Yeah, what is it?
So there is a provision in the ACE Act that directs the EPA. It tells the EPA that they are not allowed to consider any regulation of lead tackle, fishing tackle. And they define what that is for 5 years. Like, they can't do anything for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I know that yours isn't the
no, it is 100% all about fishing. That's all I care about is fishing.
But you know what the tie in there is. I know you
absolutely.
You have
absolutely
you've done a lot
because I've read all the studies.
You've read all the studies on lead ammunition, but this is related to lead fishing tackle. And just know that if you're an angler out there and you like to use lead split shot, you're going to be able to do that
for at least 5 years.
For at least 5 years. Because there won't be at least no federal regulation. Now, I should be clear, it doesn't mean that a state can't decide to put some sort of state regulation on the use, just like California has imposed
Minnesota.
In Minnesota, yeah. So individual states can do it.
Or look at it.
But the federal government cannot for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's in that bill, right? A couple other things, just to wrap this up. The act also reauthorizes the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. until 2025. Mm-hmm. That's an incredibly important partnership program, right? A lot of financial resources, a lot of partnership opportunities, leveraging dollars. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, they create partnerships with just myriad businesses out there, interests out there, states, NGOs, right, to get conservation on the ground. So that's a big deal, right? That was reauthorized. What I had been talking about was the Theodore Roosevelt Genius Prize for Technological Innovation to reduce human-predator conflict using non-lethal means. So there's a prize there, and also funds to combat the threat of invasive species, which, again, huge deal. If you're in the West, we talked about fires. Go back and listen to that episode. Forest fires aside, I mean, there's some invasive issues in national forests. You look at the rangelands, grasslands, rangelands, the sagebrush steppe, cheatgrass is a huge invasive problem that contributes to increased fire and decreased nutrient value of the landscape. It reduces the number of animals that can be on the landscape because, while cheatgrass might be very nutritional right when it emerges, it very quickly loses its nutritional value, and it can take over a range land, dominate, and choke out native grasses that have nutritional value through the entire season. So it can have some really negative impacts on the landscape and the wildlife that uses those landscapes. So having funds, and this will just be the tip of the iceberg, so much more is needed to combat the threats from invasive species. And you want to talk about, that should be another episode we do around invasive species, but you want to talk about another issue that knows no political bounds. It's invasive species.
Yep.
I mean, that's a place where it doesn't matter your political affiliation in the slightest. If you care about the great outdoors, if you spend any time on the landscape at all, you want to knock this thing down. And if you don't, you should want to knock these things down, because even if you aren't out there recreating on the landscape, hunting, fishing, hiking, backpacking, if you're not a rancher working the land, you still depend on those things in some, to some degree for your food and fiber and so forth. So every person in America should care about getting this invasive issue under control. And so there's resources dedicated to that. And, this one's sort of a minor piece for the hunting community, but it's a major piece for the ag community, right? It authorizes the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service to issue depredation permits to livestock producers that will allow them for taking black vultures or common ravens under certain circumstances during the calving and lambing season. Those are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
So now there's opportunity.
To get depredation permits to protect.
If you've got a specifically difficult issue with those.
And what I would say, when you think about common ravens, I haven't seen. So now I'm going to go out there and spread stuff.
Okay, I'm ready.
Ready?
I like this.
Okay, and I'm sure you're familiar with this because I actually think there's some information that's come out of NRCS. Maybe it wasn't NRCS. It might have been some weed and pest districts. But there's been a theory for a lot of years that ravens have a pretty significant impact on sage grouse.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I haven't seen a lot of peer-reviewed published science on it, but I'm told that there might be some coming. But I've actually seen trail cams of ravens walking into sage grouse nests and taking out an entire nest, right? It absolutely happens. So there could be, through these depredation permits at certain times, and when you think about when calving season is and lambing season, it tends to correlate pretty closely, not a perfect overlap, but pretty closely with brooding and rearing, for sage grouse.
So for those who don't know, I think what you're alluding to is a common concern and theory around the West is for all these issues that people keep identifying that harm sage grouse. One of the things that is brought up frequently in Western communities is this idea that, in general, control of predators has gone out of vogue in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And there's a belief that maybe if we controlled predators more actively, like was the case in, say, the mid 1900s, later 1900s, that we would have a rebound of a lot of game populations that would be better for mule deer, that would be better for sage grouse, other sage obligate species, where you don't have as much interest in control of predators as you used to in the past. And so this is one of those areas where you're thinking, okay, well, if we can eliminate some predation by that predator set, by having take of those predators, there could be auxiliary benefits to sage grouse. Because, of course, we weren't controlling predators in the 1900s to benefit wildlife, were we?
Right, and there was wildlife all over the place.
Yeah, we were controlling, the predator control was being done by, largely by ranchers.
Right.
Who were doing that to protect their economic livelihood. They were doing it to protect one calf or one lamb or whatever it was. That's why we had these predator controls. Well, as predator control eased up, then you also now you have these other numbers of wildlife that, on graphs you can see that there has been wildlife effects. And then the question becomes why. And a lot of the supposition has been that the negative effects on wildlife populations have to do with, oil and gas development and community growth. And there probably is some of that. But also, one thing that, again, the ranching community has been big on is like, you're ignoring the predator impact. You're ignoring the effect that predators have, and the fact that people are now, actively fighting against predator control is having a negative effect on these wildlife populations that we care about so much.
Yeah, and it's possible that so these systems are incredibly complicated.
Yes.
And fragmentation and
we're
fire
about
and all
theories
sorts of
too.
things.
We're not talking about what we don't know for sure.
Right, and so all these different things could have impacts. One of the other theories is that because you have development and more development and more fragmentation, that it actually makes it that the animals are already feeling some stress, and they're more susceptible to predation as well.
Yeah, it's one more thing.
And so it's just one more thing.
Well, anytime you're moving animals around more, you're making it easier to find their young. You're making them move more often. You're chasing them. You're all those things. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
Right. And so this is just one additional layer, and it's the whole thing with it goes back to this forest article that I'm doing again is. The point being, in these big ecological systems, you can very rarely point to one thing and say that one thing is the cause of this effect, right? It could be a bigger contributor than other things, but there are almost always multiple causes to create an effect, and this is an example of that. And so it'll be interesting. I bet there'll be some PhD students, some master's students that might be interested in researching the localized effects of allowing additional take of things like ravens, common ravens during certain times of year. They might want to study that and see if there's a correlation, if they see an uptick in other species in that general vicinity. I'll be interested. I'm throwing it out there hoping we have a few of those students listening to this podcast, and they might say, that might make a good thesis. So that's most of what is in the ACE Act. So you've seen your press release. The press release is out there saying, good thing. This is a good thing. This is a good thing.
Now you can tell everyone you understand why it's a good thing.
Right. There's one other thing too in there. I should have mentioned. It also includes authorization and funding for the National Fish Habitat Conservation Through Partnerships Act. And that act has supported more than 840 projects that benefit fish habitat across the country. And it's one of these leverages on the ground partnerships. So just another great thing out there improving habitat. In this instance, maybe you don't even know it, and it's improved a fishery that you love to fish in, right? So
So people that were supporting this act were pretty varied, and they run from the stock growers associations to the game and fish departments, National Wildlife Federation, Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, AFWA, which is our people, American Sport Fishing Association, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, and like
Trout Unlimited, Audubon Society.
Yeah.
I mean,
the National Deer
Backcountry
Alliance,
Hunters and Anglers,
Safari Club.
Yeah, I mean, it actually brings some odd bedfellows together, frankly, but it's just a
Backcountry Hunters and
Wildlife
Anglers.
Management Institute. I mentioned Backcountry. Now you mentioned them twice. It just brings a. Let's just put it this way: it has broad support from the agriculture community, the conservation community. It's wildly popular, which is why it passed, overwhelmingly passed. It had overwhelming support. In fact, in the House, I don't even think they took a vote. I think it was a voice vote.
Well done, everyone.
So, big deal, big win. We just wanted to take some time so maybe you'd understand it.
At least 5 major wins.
It's a big deal.
There's more coming. I would say that this has been... Do I want to make political jokes?
No.
Okay. Well,
I don't think so. But it's been awesome. Let's just put it that way. It's been awesome. There's your political joke.
I can stop myself.
It's been amazing. We actually still have a couple of months left this year, and there are some things floating out there that could find, from a conservation standpoint, that could find their way. We'll keep monitoring it, but they could find their way into, some sort of stimulus package in a lame duck session. There's still opportunity to get more done, even in this Congress.
I know there's one that people are whipping and spurring on.
There's a
Recovering
couple.
America's Wildlife Act.
I'll be surprised. I'll put
too.
my money down right now saying it's not going to happen this Congress. But there
have been lots of surprises.
There have been surprises. But there are other things out there that maybe could happen, and we'll continue to follow them and bring them up.
Yep.
Anything else you want to cover before we call it?
Yeah.
What?
William Perry Pendley. The gift that keeps on giving. I can't leave it alone.
What's the new update on that?
Where's he at today? Do you know?
He's been in Wyoming.
Has he?
I don't know where he is today, but he was in Cody just a couple of days ago.
What was he doing?
Giving a speech saying he's still in charge.
Oh, kind of funny. It's interesting.
Saying nothing has changed. The court decisions changed nothing. I'm still in charge. That's what he said.
Good times, everybody. Good times.
It's odd. He even said. So this part is interesting. He actually said, "I've never been the acting director. I've always been the deputy director." Right? And nothing has changed. And then he took credit for the Great American Outdoors Act, said no president in the past 40 years has been able to, there have been 5 presidents that have tried to permanently fund LWCF, and this is the one that was able to do it. So took all the credit for actually getting that done.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And then when the greatest irony of it all, at the signing ceremony for the Great American Outdoors Act on the program, he was listed as the acting director of BLM.
That's funny. So here's some interesting news. It's like hot off the presses. Is that now there is a new wrinkle in the William Perry Pendley saga, which, as you know, there was a lawsuit by Governor Bullock of Montana,
which we've talked about on this at length.
And so now there is a group of
I'm saying I got to go soon, so we got to wrap it up.
No, we'll make it quick. But now it turns out that there is a group of congressional Republicans who are saying, "Wait a minute, you're saying that the stuff he did was invalid, right?"
Right.
They're saying, "What about the 60 decisions that were made under the Obama administration by people who are sitting in the acting director's seat?" And they're claiming that this invalidates those decisions as well. There is a counter argument to that, of course, of saying the circumstances were somewhat different, but it is unique and interesting that this now.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's out there, and I don't want it to go away. You know why?
It's not going to go away.
Because I just love that we get to talk about William Perry Pendley every episode.
It's not going to go away.
No.
And, we'll leave it out there for now. I'm going to do some digging because I have some thoughts on the
We're just going to
the
come back
argument
to
against
at
the Obama administration.
at
But
the end of
we'll talk
every
about it again
episode.
We'll talk about it next week.
Yeah,
after
in
I
our
have a chance to dive in more.
Yeah, in our William Perry Penley moment.
The Perry section, the WPP section of the section of the podcast.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. So now that we have the WPP section done, now I'm done.
Okay. Well, I'm done too. And thanks to everybody for listening. Hope you learned something today. If you didn't, reach out. If you didn't learn anything, you knew all this, reach out. Maybe we should have you on as a co-host. Because Mike's not here. Never seems to be here.
Yeah, we're taking applications. So now, you're going to need to send a resume and a $10 bill with that resume.
Yeah, you actually have to pay. We need to make money on this now. So
cash.
You need to pay us to be a co-host.
Yeah, we do not accept checks.
And credit cards have a 2.5% finance charge.
Yeah.
So
you can cash.
In any event.
Is it legal to send cash in the mail?
Why not?
Then by all means do it. Okay, there you go.
In any event, so we really do appreciate you listening to this, and hope you did learn something from it, because there was a lot in that bill. As we kind of dived into it and learned more about it, there's a lot there and a lot of great things for sportsmen. And so everybody can, stand up a little taller, stick your chest out a little bit more, chin up a little bit more, because it's a good day to be a hunter and angler in America. We're seeing some great stuff come out of Congress, and we're right in the middle of hunting season. There's just a lot of good things, a lot of things to be proud about and happy about, to be a hunter or an angler here in the United States. So hold that chin up and get after it. Hunting season's going. I'm getting after it next week. You'll get after it. We'll share stories. Until then, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.